everyone, and welcome to LycanhoodReads. Once again, my name is Michaela, and thank you so much for joining me today. What I'd like to do today is the JAN-uary book tag created by Jan of JAN over on BookTube. I'll have her channel linked down below. I believe she created this book tag just this year for the first time because there weren't any book tags for the beginning of the year, which, you know, we need one for every season, I think. This book tag has 10 questions altogether, so pretty hefty. Most of them just involve like goals from last year, this year, expectations for the new year, and the like. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in here. Okay, question number 1 is, what is the first book that you read last year and the last book that you read last year? So what's the first and last book you read in 2021, basically? Jan went on to say that she couldn't remember what the first book she read in 2021 was, but if you could remember, to go ahead and add it to the list. So I had mine documented on Goodreads, or at least I believe this is the first book I read. At the very least, it's the first book I read physically. I might have read something before in audiobook, but the very first book I read of 2021 was 1,000 Ships by Natalie Hayes, which was, of course, a Greek Trojan War retelling, focusing on the female perspectives of the women involved in the Trojan War. And that one was pretty good. I'm pretty sure that was my first read of 2021. At the very least, I read it early in January of 2021. For my last book of 2021, it was actually The Doors of Eden by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And I read that on audiobook, and I finished it on New Year's Eve. So it kind of worked out perfectly. It's a sci-fi epic involving like multi-dimensional world hopping, kind of like a multi-dimensional multiverse apocalypse. There are lesbians. It has a trans woman scientist. She's kind of a big deal. And just lots of shenanigans. Something's wrong in Britain, as always. And that was my very last book of the year. I thought it was pretty fitting, and I really enjoyed it. I'm getting more and more into Adrian Tchaikovsky. I just find him super impressive and unique when it comes to sci-fi writing. So it's always a joy to read. I'm going to be reading him more in the new year. That's how I finished 2021. Question number 2. What is the first book you're going to be reading in 2022? So what am I reading right now? My very first read of 2022 is The Empire's Ruin, and that's by Brian Staveley. It's a continuation of the Chronicles of the Unhewn Throne series that he has, but it's the start of a new trilogy in that sort of larger universe. And it's about one of the characters that I loved from the main trilogy. They are kind of the star of this one, so I'm super excited about it. I've wanted it for a while, and I got it with my Christmas money in my New Year book haul. And it was the one I knew I was going to read, the first book of the year. I was kind of saving it for that in particular. So The Empire's Ruin is the answer to that question. First read of 2022. I've just started it, so I'm not done with it yet, but I'm not going to finish anything else before I read it. Question number 3. What are 3 goals you have for your 2022 reading? Well, to start, I'm going to try to exceed my reading goal from 2021. I had a reading goal, it's kind of a long story, but I had a reading goal of basically 80 books in 2021, and I exceeded that with reading 88 books in total. So this year I'm just going to, I was honestly surprised that I reached 80 or 85 or 88. So I don't know if I'll be able to do that this year or every year or whatever. But I'm going to go ahead and set my goal at 90 and just see how it goes as the year goes on. I don't know if I'll read 90 books. Maybe I'll read more. Reading 100 would be great. That would be the most I'd read in a year in my whole life. So that would be kind of the ultimate. But I'm going to set my goal at 90 just so there's not too much pressure and see where the year takes me. Beyond just that basic reading goal, I also want to be reading more books by people of color, authors of color. Particularly sci-fi and fantasy books by authors of color. So, of course, there's kind of a backlog of more classic science fiction and fantasy by people of color. Things like Kindred by Octavia Butler, N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy, which I have already tried to read. But I am looking for newer science fiction and fantasy by people of color rather than those sort of... I'm kind of intimidated by like Octavia Butler, and I'm not really sure I'm going to like that I know a lot of her books, like Kindred, for example, it's a time traveling book, so she goes back in time to like the time when they were slaves, and I'm just not interested in reading that, honestly. So even though Kindred is kind of a prime example of what I'm looking for, it's just I'm not interested in that plot point or that time period. So I want something newer, something fresher, just more modern sci-fi and fantasy. But I do want to be reading all that. A good example of something coming up is Sweep the Stars by Maurice Brodus. That's going to be, I believe, West African inspired sci-fi fantasy series. More sci-fi than fantasy, but I think it's kind of a nice blend of both. I'll talk about it a little bit later under another question. But one of my goals is to read more science fiction and fantasy by authors of color. So there's one. Also to read more books from outside the US and outside of the UK in particular. So I want to read more foreign science fiction and fantasy, maybe some from New Zealand, Australian, that sort of stuff. And just however I can incorporate it into reading more by people of color as well would be great. Just generally trying to get outside the box, get outside of this little Western publication sphere and see what other perspectives and other kinds of stories are out there. Beyond that, I also want to read more own voices, particularly own voices of gay men, because last year I ended up reading a lot of queer, like romance, like queer romantic comedy books that were male-male relationship focused, but they are written by women. So this year I want to try to focus on books that are written by gay men about, gay male relationships or gay male characters. I don't really read much in the romance genre, not like erotica, but I do like little rom-com-y sort of books or urban fantasy, and that seems to be where a lot of those are hidden, like hidden gems. So I'll be looking forward to that as well. Question number 4. What are 3 anticipated releases that you're looking forward to in 2022? Of course, I did an anticipated releases video at the end of December for a lot of the books I'm looking forward to in 2022. But just to sum up 3 of them, the ones I'm looking forward to the most is probably going to be The Discord of the Gods by JAN-uary, and that's going to be book 5 in her Chorus of Dragons saga. And that's a saga that is very close to my heart. I love those books. They are queer, epic fantasy, just incredible world building and incredible character work. And so that's been building. There are 5 books. This is the very last one coming out. It's called The Discord of the Gods, and it comes out, let me see, April 26th. So I cannot wait. I'm ecstatic. Beyond that, I'm also really looking forward to The Hourglass Throne by K.D. Edwards. This is going to be the 3rd full-length novel in his The Tarot Card Sequence series, which is a urban fantasy series about, what is it about? The hidden city of Atlantis, which is full of magical creatures, magic users, and these royal houses that are based on tarot cards. The main character in that book is a gay male who is in a male-male relationship. It's full of great queer found family vibes, and I'm really looking forward to the third full-length novel coming out on May 17th by K.D. Edwards. Now, again, for a change of pace, just so those 2 are sequels, and I wanted to mention at least one on here that was going to be a debut, and that would be the one I mentioned before, Sweep of Stars by Maurice Brodus. And again, I believe that's a West African fantasy-inspired science fiction epic? I don't know. I think it's the beginning of a series. I don't know much about it other than that it's coming out on March 29th. It has a really cool cover. It should have plenty of people of color, characters of color. It's written by an author of color, African-inspired, and it's got a little something to do with a branch of humanity splitting off and traveling to a different planet and the stars to build a utopian society. And then at some point in the future, they are kind of clashing with what was left of Earth society. I'm not sure if it's like a war or political intrigue or maybe both. I think it's going to be pretty amazing. And again, that comes out on March 29th. So I'm looking forward to that one. Question number 5. It's going to be, what are any goals from last year that you achieved or goals that you didn't quite reach? So my main goal for last year was to read 80 books, which I did. So I'm pretty excited about that. Beyond that, the only other goal or challenge I gave myself for last year was just to read or buy one new release a month every month of last year, and that didn't quite work out financially. I just wasn't able to keep up with it. I think I did pretty well until June or July, and then like August through December I didn't really do it. It wasn't too big of a deal. I still ended up reading a lot of new releases. I probably read at least 12, if not more, new releases last year, but they didn't necessarily correspond with the month that they came out. It was just kind of fell into chaos. Not too worried about that challenge. I won't be doing that again this year just because of the financial aspect of it. And also I just would like to support like my local library more and just find different ways to read that aren't going to be as expensive. I'm also just trying to dwindle down the TBR that I already own instead of buying a lot of new books. So while I did do a New Year or Christmas book haul where I bought books with a lot of the money or gift cards and stuff that I got for Christmas, I won't be buying a lot of new books in the new year. It really just depends on what I already have and what I need to fulfill my other like own voices and POC authors goals. Beyond that, another goal is kind of an unofficial goal that I set for myself last year was to read more queer horror or queer thrillers. I really just wanted to kind of dip my toe into that genre, especially in the fall around spooky season. And I succeeded at that for the most part. I read several, I think 5 or 6, either horror, thriller, or supernatural thriller books in September and October that featured queer characters. So that was a goal that I succeeded in. And I kind of want to continue on with that this year, not in any kind of heavy way, but it is a genre that I'm interested in, a genre that I don't know much about, and a genre that I would like to support as much as possible, even if it's not the primary thing that I read. Alright, goal number 6. What are some anticipated releases that you don't plan to read this year in 2022? So this question's a little funny. It's just kind of like what books are coming out that maybe everyone else is anticipating, but that you aren't. So it's like an anti-anticipated releases question. And that's pretty easy for me. There are a lot of books coming out this year by authors that I just don't have any interest in or don't really care for, in genres that I normally would read in. So in science fiction and fantasy genres, for instance, Sarah J. Maas has a new book coming out. I don't quite know what it's called. I think it's The House of Earth and Sky, maybe. It's got a beautiful cover, but I don't have any interest in reading Sarah J. Maas. I haven't read any of her books, but just based off what I know about her, like it's not my jam. So that's one that everyone's talking about that I don't really care to read, don't plan to read. Another kind of similar situation is going to be Holly Black's first adult fantasy book. I believe it's called The House of Night or The Book of Night, something like that. Yeah, Holly Black. I read some of her books when I was in high school. One of her first ones, it was called like White Cat or something. And I didn't like it. That was one of her earlier ones, so maybe she's gotten better since then, but it just wasn't for me. And since then, I know she's gotten all into like this sort of fae romance trope. She's kind of like the queen of the fae romance young adult books. And even though this is her first adult book, and so maybe that would be different, I'm just not interested. So I'm not looking forward to that one. And last but not least would be Casey McQuestion's new book. I don't know the name of it. I think it's like I Wish I Never Kissed, and then it's like a girl's name. I don't even know the title of it. But Casey McQuestion wrote Red, White, and Royal Blue, and she also wrote One Last Stop. I know that there are some problematic elements to both those books, and I don't really feel like getting into all that. Like, I read Red, White, and Royal Blue, and I enjoyed it, but I've since found other books that are kind of similar that I like more and that are maybe less problematic. Um, and of course, that's a male romance, and once again, I'm just trying to read like that sort of book from an own voices author. So I don't really have any interest in supporting her or in her new book, which just kind of looks not really what I'm interested in anyway. So not hard to stay away from it. Those are 3 authors and 3 books that I am not highly anticipating in 2022. All right, question number 7. What are some reading habits that you would like to change in 2022? Well, I mean, I don't have any like bad habits exactly, other than that I spend too much money on books, which I think is a relative assessment. And that, nope, that's pretty much it. But some things I would like to focus more on would be in the new year, I want to mood read more. Last year I had pretty structured like TBRs every month, but I couldn't stick to them. I would usually just veer off course, just depending on what was going on or what I was feeling. And so this year, while I still want to make TBRs, I want them to be much looser and have a lot of room, just wiggle room to kind of read whatever I feel like reading at the time. And I've already talked about how I want to read more own voices, either from authors of colors or more specifically from gay male authors. So if you have any suggestions of like own voices reads in the science fiction and fantasy genres, I would love to hear them. I'm really looking forward to focusing on that in the new year as much as I can. And always a goal, always a struggle, is to use the library more. Once again, last year, spending too much money on books was a pretty big financial burden. So I want to try to really utilize the resources around me as much as possible, including the library. So even though that's a goal I'm always setting for myself, once again, I'm just going to kind of re-up the ante and say I want to use the library more in 2022. Okay, question number 8 is going to be, are there any book to movie adaptations that you're looking forward to in 2022? And when I saw this question, I was honestly like, nothing comes to mind. So I had to like research and see what was coming out in 2022. So there's nothing that I'm thrilled about, nothing that I'm like dying to see. But apparently Kindred, Octavia Butler's Kindred, is being adapted by FX in either 22 or 23. And then, of course, HBO's Game of Thrones spinoff, House of the Dragon. I'm honestly not excited about that. Like, I'm gonna watch it, but I'm not thrilled. Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice is being adapted into a television series on AMC, which is surprising. I hadn't heard anything about that. I'll definitely check it out. I like the original movie, but I never read the books. So, and I'm always interested in vampires, and I'd like to see what they might do to try to update that story, since it hasn't been adapted since like the late 90s, I guess. I think that could be super cool, and AMC has a track record of making cool TV shows too. So I would definitely be interested in seeing that one. I didn't even know it was coming out before I saw this question. Also, we're getting The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. That's being adapted by Netflix. I don't actually know much about this series. I haven't read it before, but I am a fan of Neil Gaiman, kind of casually. I like some of his stuff, and I don't like others. It just kind of hit or miss. But I've heard a lot of great things about The Sandman, and I'd be interested to see it be adapted, because I don't plan to actually read the comic books. That's kind of a big commitment. And lastly is The Power, which of course was a science fiction and fantasy novel by Naomi Alderman. I read it a couple years ago in 2018, I think. And I liked it. I think it's not as good as I would have liked it to be. It's a cool idea that wasn't perfectly executed in the book. I don't know if making it into a TV show at Amazon, it looks like, is who owns the rights. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to like avoid some of the pitfalls that the issues I have with the book, but I would be interested to see them try. So if that makes it, it's scheduled to come out in 2022. If that comes out, I'm definitely going to check it out, but I wouldn't say that I'm excited about it. Okay, number 9. What are some bookish memories from 2021? Some of your favorite bookish memories? Well, one of my favorites is when I road tripped to Miami with a bunch of friends of mine. It was quite a drive, and I was reading The Last Mortal Bond by Brian Staveley on audiobook the whole time. So that was the final book in a trilogy, which was kind of a big deal. It was a long road trip, and I just had my headphones in the whole time. I was completely enthralled, and that was great. Also, when I read Harrow the Night, I stayed up late, like most of the night, reading it to finish it, and I hadn't done that in a really long time. So that was just a really enjoyable read. Me late at night in a dark room by myself, just flying through Harrow the Night. Those are going to be two of my favorite bookish memories. And lastly, number 10. Are there any books from last year that you need to carry over into 2022? I wasn't quite sure if this answer counted, but a book that I had on constantly on my TBRs last year, and I kept planning to read it and planning to read it, and I kept putting it off. Even towards the end of the year, I swore to myself I was going to read it in December, and I still didn't, is The Bone Shard's Daughter by Andrea Stewart. I meant to read it all year long. I had planned to read it, but it never happened. And I don't know why. I was just sort of intimidated by it. And just for whatever reason, it didn't happen. So even though I technically haven't started yet, I feel like this is a book that's carrying over and kind of haunting me from 2021. So I plan to read it in 2022, as early in 2022 as I can stand. I don't have anything against it. Like, part of me is excited about it. But now there's, like, hype and, like, I don't know. But that would be the only one I could think to answer that question, would be The Bone Shard's Daughter. Okay, so that was Jan from Jan Agaton's JAN-uary book tag. Thank you for joining me. Thanks, Jan, for coming up with this tag, and I hope you guys all have a happy new year. Goodbye.